Most people live by following someone. They follow ideas, systems, authorities, ready-made paths, not out of clarity, but out of fear. Following offers psychological shelter. Someone decides, someone guarantees, someone promises that everything is under control. When this dependence isn't brought to consciousness, it becomes an invisible obstacle that governs choices, desires, and even the way a person perceives themselves. Alan Watts observes that trusting yourself isn't a gesture of strength, but of surrender. Surrender of the need for external guidance, approval, and borrowed certainties. When you stop following, you lose references, you lose belonging, and you lose security. But it's exactly in this loss that direct contact with life emerges. Without intermediaries, without promises, and without guarantees. You're born without knowing how to live. And from day one, someone is there telling you. Parents teach you to talk, to walk, to behave. Teachers show you what to think, what to value, how to interpret reality. Friends teach you how to dress, how to talk, how to be part of the group. This isn't bad. It's how we learn. It's how society works. But the impulse to seek external guidance never stops. It continues into adult life. Only now you're no longer following your parents. You follow bosses, influencers, spiritual gurus, political systems, ideologies. Anything that tells you how to live, how to think, how to be. Why? Because following offers psychological security. When you have a ready-made path, you don't have to deal with the existential anxiety of being alive without guarantees. You don't have to face the fact that nobody really knows what they're doing, that life is fundamentally uncertain, that you can do everything right and still suffer, fail, lose everything. Following gives you the illusion that someone knows, that there's a safe path, that if you just obey the rules, follow the steps, trust the authority, everything will work out in the end. Alan Watts saw this with brutal clarity. He saw that people don't follow due to lack of intelligence. They don't follow due to mental laziness. They follow out of fear. Fear of the now. Fear of being present without knowing what to do. Fear of accepting that life doesn't come with an instruction manual, that you're navigating this in the dark. Doing the best you can with what you have. And following reduces that fear. It gives you something to hold on to. A structure. A system. An authority that promises you're not alone. That you don't need to figure it all out on your own. But this security is an illusion. Because nobody can live your life for you. Nobody can feel what you feel. Nobody can make your choices in your place. And the more you outsource this, the more you delegate your perception to external voices. The more you distance yourself from your direct experience of this moment. You're so busy following instructions on how to live that you forget to actually live. In The Wisdom of Insecurity, Watts explains that the desire to follow is born from the refusal to accept impermanence. Life is unstable by nature. Everything is constantly changing. Nothing remains. Nothing is guaranteed. Your body is aging, your relationships are changing, your beliefs are transforming. The world around you is in constant flux, and this terrifies the mind that seeks security. So you look for something stable, something fixed, something that promises permanence in a world that is, by essence, impermanent. That's where systems come in, ideologies, spiritual paths. They promise stability. If you follow these principles, if you practice these techniques, if you believe these truths, you'll find peace, you'll find security, you'll finally stop suffering. But this promise is false. Life doesn't work that way. Reality doesn't obey your systems. Impermanence doesn't stop just because you found a doctrine that comforts you. Everything keeps changing, everything keeps flowing, and you keep trying to hold on to something fixed, spending your energy trying to freeze the river, trying to turn the flow into stone. The more you try, the more you suffer. Watts insisted that wisdom isn't in finding security, but in accepting insecurity as the very nature of existence. And this doesn't mean giving up. It doesn't mean being passive. It means stopping the search for guarantees where they don't exist. It means living knowing that everything can change at any moment, that you can lose everything you have, that the only certainty is uncertainty. And curiously, when you truly accept this, when you stop fighting against impermanence, something changes. You relax. Not because you found security, but because you stopped needing it. You realize you can live without guarantees, that you can make choices without knowing if they're right, that you can be present even without knowing what will happen in the next moment. Watts constantly criticized the attempt to control life through methods, rules, and systems. You see this everywhere. People trying to guarantee the future through obsessive planning, through techniques that promise results if you just follow the steps correctly. But there's a difference between using tools to navigate life and believing those tools can control life. They can't. Life is much bigger than any system you invent. It's much more complex than any method can encompass. And the more you try to control, the more you try to force reality to fit into your plans, the more you distance yourself from the living experience of the present. Because the present doesn't need control. It's simply happening. Your heart is beating without you needing to plan each beat. Your breath is flowing without you needing to guarantee the next breath. Life is unfolding through you without asking permission, without following your script. And when you're obsessed trying to control the future, you're not present for what's happening now. You're always in your head, always thinking, always planning, always trying to predict, always trying to protect yourself from something that may or may not happen. Watts used an interesting analogy. Trying to control life is like trying to make an ocean wave stop. You can build barriers, you can create systems, you can develop elaborate techniques, but the wave continues being a wave. The ocean continues being an ocean, and you spent all your energy fighting against something that never needed to be fought. True intelligence isn't in controlling, it's in moving with. Not in forcing life to follow your plan, but in responding to what's happening now, in a fluid way, organic, natural, organic. Why is following so comfortable? Why is it so hard to abandon this need to have someone guiding you? Because following offers something that goes far beyond ready-made answers. It offers belonging. When you're part of a group that follows the same ideas, that believes in the same principles, you feel you belong to something bigger. You're not alone. You have a tribe, a community, people who speak the same language as you, who understand your references, who validate your choices. And this is deeply comforting. When you follow, when you align with a system, you automatically gain that place. You know who your allies are, who your adversaries are. You know what to think about each subject. There's predictability, there's social security, there's constant validation. You post something aligned with the group's values and get likes, comments, supportive emojis. You express an opinion that resonates with the shared ideology and are immediately validated. Recognized as someone who gets it, who's on the right path. And this creates a loop. The more you're validated for following, the more you feel you're right. The more you convince yourself you found the truth, the more you identify with the group. And anything that threatens this identification is automatically seen as an enemy, as a threat. Because it's not just an idea being questioned, it's your identity, it's your belonging, it's your psychological security. And there's also the relief of responsibility. When you follow, the choices aren't entirely yours. If something goes wrong, you can blame the method, the guru, the system. You always have an out. You always have a way to protect yourself from total responsibility for your decisions. But the hidden cost of all this is the loss of direct contact with your own experience. You're no longer feeling life immediately. You're filtering everything through the lenses of the system you follow. You look at a situation and before feeling what you really feel, you think, what would my guru say about this? What does my ideology prescribe in this case? How would my group interpret this experience? You lose access to your direct perception. You're always mediating your experience through concepts, always translating what you feel into the language of the system. And the more you do this, the more you distance yourself from who you really are. Because who you are doesn't fit into any system. You're much more complex, much more contradictory, much more fluid than any mental structure can capture. If you're enjoying this content, you might also like our exclusive material that's in the first pinned comment. Trusting yourself isn't self-affirmation. It isn't strengthening the ego. It isn't believing you're special. It's exactly the opposite. In the book, On the Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are, Watts explains that this I you spend your life trying to strengthen isn't what you think it is. It's a mental construction, a narrative you tell about yourself, a character you created and now believe is real. You have a story about who you are. your qualities, your flaws, your past experiences, your future ambitions, your fears, your desires, and you identify so much with this story that you forget it's just a story, an interpretation, an edited version of something much vaster and indefinable. You think you're the character, when in reality you're the consciousness that's perceiving all of this. You're not your thoughts. You're not your emotions. You're not your memories. You're that which is aware of all this. And this distinction changes everything. Trusting yourself is stopping clinging to this character. It's realizing you're not just this separate identity, this isolated ego that needs to defend itself from the world. You're an inseparable part of life, your life manifesting through this specific form. And when you understand this, when you really feel this, not just intellectually but viscerally, trusting yourself stops being about strengthening an identity and becomes about relaxing into it, about letting go, about stopping trying to maintain an image that was never fixed from the beginning. You stop trying to prove something. You stop trying to become someone. You stop fighting to maintain a coherent image of yourself that resists time, changes, the inevitable contradictions of being alive. There's no separate you that needs to be protected. There's no solid ego that needs to be cultivated. There's only life happening, and you're part of that. You are that. And in this there's a surrender, not a conquest. You're not conquering self-confidence in the motivational sense. You're abandoning the need to be someone specific. And paradoxically, it's in this surrender that true confidence emerges. Not the confidence that you'll succeed, but the confidence that you can live without needing to be anyone other than what you already are. Watts constantly warned about a very subtle trap, transforming teachings into authorities. Because that's what happens. You read a book that inspires you. You hear a teacher who makes sense. You find a practice that helps you. And suddenly you're following it as if it were absolute truth. You transform the teaching into yet another external authority, another system to be obeyed, another ready-made path to be followed. And this happens in all spiritual traditions, in all philosophies, in all self-knowledge movements. People take teachings that were created to point to direct experience and transform those teachings into substitutions for experience. You see this in Buddhism, where people memorize sutras but don't truly meditate. You see it in Christianity, where people quote verses but don't practice the love they preach. You see it in mindfulness practices, where people follow techniques rigidly but completely miss the point of simply being present. The teaching becomes dogma, the practice becomes empty ritual, and you're back to the same place as before, following something external instead of trusting your own perception. Watts used a metaphor he repeated in various forms. Spiritual teachings are like fingers pointing at the moon. If you keep looking at the finger, you never see the moon. The finger is useful. It shows you the direction. But you need to stop looking at it at some point and look where it's pointing. And most people get stuck on the finger. They keep studying the teaching, memorizing the words, debating interpretations, creating hierarchies of who understands better, transforming it into yet another power structure, another way to feel part of a group, another way to avoid the real thing, the direct experience of life happening now. And the worst part is that the more you do this, the more you convince yourself you're on the right path. Because you're doing everything you should be doing. You're studying, practicing, following the rules, but you're not transforming anything. You just traded one system for another. You traded conventional religion for alternative spirituality. You traded materialism for personal development. You traded the pursuit of status for the pursuit of enlightenment. But the structure is the same. You're still following, still outsourcing your perception, still seeking something external to tell you how to live. There's the fear of not knowing. This fear that governs almost all human choices without us realizing it. Because the culture we live in treats doubt as weakness, treats uncertainty as inadequacy, treats not knowing as something that needs to be corrected urgently. You need to have answers. You need to have strong opinions about everything. You need to appear like you know what you're doing even when you haven't got a clue. And this starts early. In school, you're rewarded for knowing the right answers and punished for admitting you don't know. At work, you're valued for your expertise, for your ability to solve problems, for your confidence in stating things with certainty. On social media, you're validated when you have clear and categorical opinions, when you pick a side and defend it with conviction. Doubt doesn't generate engagement. Nuance doesn't go viral. Admitting you're not sure about something doesn't get you likes. So you learn to be certain even when you're not. You learn to hide your doubts. You learn to perform knowledge even when you're lost. And this creates an entire society of people who are afraid to admit they don't know, who are pretending all the time, who are desperately trying to maintain an appearance of control over things nobody controls. But for Watts, living is accepting the mystery. It's accepting that life is fundamentally incomprehensible, that you'll never understand everything, that there are questions that have no answers, paradoxes that don't resolve, mysteries that remain mysteries no matter how much you study. And instead of seeing this as a problem, instead of treating this as something that needs to be overcome, you can simply accept. You can live without knowing. You can make choices without being certain they're right. You can exist in the midst of uncertainty without panicking. And trusting yourself requires exactly this: abandoning the need for final answers. Because if you only trust yourself when you're certain, then you're not really trusting. You're just seeking another form of control. True trust is making choices even in doubt. It's acting even without guarantees. It's living even without knowing where you're going. It's accepting that you're navigating in the dark, and that's okay. That everyone is navigating in the dark. That nobody has the complete map. That life is improvisation from beginning to end. Stopping following has a social cost. And it's not a metaphorical cost. It's concrete. It's real. It's palpable. When you stop following the ready-made paths, when you start trusting your own perception more than external voices, when you stop performing the version of yourself that others expect, you lose connections. You lose friends who don't understand why you changed, who can no longer relate to you the same way, who feel you betrayed them by leaving the tribe. You still see each other, still talk, but there's no longer that connection that was there before. Because the connection was based on shared worldviews, on common values, and you no longer share that. You lose connection with family because you stop following the expectations that were placed on you since you were born. Because your choices don't make sense within the family logic. Because you question values that should never be questioned. And they don't understand. They ask you what happened. They tell you you've changed. And it's not a compliment, it's an accusation. You lose professional opportunities because you're no longer willing to play the game the way everyone plays it. Because you don't perform ambition in the expected way. And this generates loneliness. Real loneliness. Palpable. That you feel in your skin when you realize you no longer fit anywhere. You no longer belong to the groups from before. But you also don't easily find new groups. Because you're not following established paths. You're inventing your own. People look at you strangely. They judge you. They label you as lost, as arrogant, as someone who's making a mistake. And there are days when you believe them. Days when you ask yourself if you shouldn't turn back. If it wouldn't be easier to just follow. Just fit in. Watts never romanticized this. He never said it would be easy. He never promised you'd find your perfect tribe. He never guaranteed everything would work out in the end. He just showed it's inevitable. If you choose to live with authenticity, if you stop performing, if you trust your own experience instead of following ready-made maps, you're going to pay a social price. You're going to feel alone. You're going to be misunderstood. You're going to lose connections that once seemed important. And there's no way to avoid this. There's no shortcut. There's no way to have authenticity without giving up the comfort of forced belonging. But this loneliness is honest. It's not based on masks. It's not based on performing an acceptable version of yourself. It's the loneliness of being yourself and discovering that not everyone will understand you, that not everyone will accept you, that some connections simply don't survive when you stop pretending. And yes, this hurts, but it's real. When you stop following, when you truly take responsibility for your own life, something changes fundamentally. You eliminate excuses. Because now there's no method to blame when things go wrong. There's no guru to hold responsible when you don't get the promised results. There's no system to point the finger at when your life doesn't look like what you imagined. The responsibility is all yours. And this generates fear. A deep fear. Visceral. Of being completely exposed. Completely vulnerable. Completely responsible for every choice you make. You can no longer say, I was just following what I was taught. You can no longer say, I did everything the method told me to. You can no longer hide behind external authorities. You're here, making choices, and the consequences are yours. And there's no safety net. There's no guarantee. There's no plan B that someone prepared for you. You're navigating this alone, in the dark, without knowing if you're doing it right, without being certain of anything. For most people, this is too terrifying. It's much easier to follow, much more comfortable to have someone to blame, much safer to delegate your life to external voices. Because if you take total responsibility and things go wrong, there's no escape. You can't say it was the economy, that it was the system, that it was the guru who deceived you. You need to look in the mirror and admit, I chose this. I made these decisions. I created this situation. Or at minimum, I contributed to it in ways I don't want to admit. And this is brutal. It's much more comfortable to be a victim. It's much easier to blame external forces. It's much more comforting to believe you did everything right, but the world is unfair, people are bad, fate was cruel. But what Watts tried to show is that this responsibility, as scary as it is also liberating. Because when you can no longer blame anyone, when you can no longer outsource your choices, you finally have to be honest with yourself. You have to look at your life and admit, this here is me. These choices are mine. These consequences are mine. And there's nobody to save you, nobody to fix your life, nobody to give you the right answers. You're all you've got. And in this brutal acceptance of total responsibility, there's an honesty that cuts through all illusions. You stop pretending. You stop deceiving yourself. You stop living on autopilot hoping someone will show up and tell you what to do. You wake up to the fact that your life is yours. And if you don't live it consciously, nobody will do it for you. And when you abandon the victim role, you also gain power. Not the power to control everything, not the power to guarantee results, but the power to make conscious choices knowing they're yours, that you're not just reacting, just following, just being carried by the current. You're actively participating in your life, for better and for worse. And yes, this hurts. Yes, this scares. But it also gives you something precious. You're finally actually living your life. Not the life someone designed for you, the life that's yours, with all its mistakes, with all its imperfection, with all its raw and real humanity. This video talks about not following anyone, but you're here, listening, maybe agreeing, maybe thinking, yes, that's it, I'm going to do this. And in this, there's an inevitable contradiction. Because if you follow the advice not to follow anyone, you're following someone. If you transform these ideas into yet another system to be obeyed, you've completely missed the point. Watts compared his teachings to a raft. It's useful for crossing the river, but after you reach the other side, you don't carry the raft on your back for the rest of your life. You leave it there and move on. This video shouldn't be followed. These ideas shouldn't become another external authority. They should be used, if they make sense, and then forgotten. Because the goal isn't to give you another ready-made path. It's not to turn you into a follower of Alan Watts. It's not to create another community of people who believe in the same things and feel superior because of it. The goal is to wake you up to the possibility of living directly, without intermediaries, without needing external validation, without needing someone telling you how to be. And if these words help you realize this, great. But after you realize it, forget the words. Forget the video. Forget Alan Watts. Forget all of this, and simply live. Because life doesn't happen through concepts. It doesn't happen through teachings. It doesn't happen through philosophies. It happens now, directly, without needing any intermediary. And if you're too busy following teachings about how not to follow, you've missed the opportunity to actually not follow. So this video isn't to be followed. It's to be used as a mirror that shows you something you already know but forgot. You don't need anyone to tell you how to live. You're already living. And all the rest, all the searches, all the teachings, all the gurus, are just elaborate distractions to avoid having to deal with the radical simplicity of being alive now, without knowing, without guarantees, without needing anyone's permission. And what remains when you relax this constant effort to become someone, when you stop trying to strengthen the ego, when you let go of all this tension? It's not enlightenment in the mystical sense people imagine. It's not ecstasy. It's not cosmic revelation. It's not a transcendent experience that transforms you into a superior being. It's something much simpler, much more ordinary, much more immediate. It's presence. It's being here, now, without excessive narrative, without constant analysis, without incessant judgment, without needing to turn each moment into a lesson, without needing to extract meaning from everything. You eat when you're hungry, and that's it. You're not thinking if you're eating consciously enough, if you're chewing the right way, if you're being mindful as you should be. You're just eating, feeling the taste, the texture, the simple act of nourishing the body. You walk, and that's it. You're not thinking if you're walking in a spiritual way, if your posture is correct, if you're present in the moment like the books teach. You're just walking, feeling the movement, the weight of the body, the contact of feet with the ground. You breathe, and that's it. You're not trying to control the breath. You're not doing any technique. You're not using this as a tool to achieve something. You're just breathing, as you always have, from when you were born until now, without effort, without intention, without purpose. Watts insisted on this radical simplicity that people completely lose when they start the spiritual search. Because the spiritual search, for most people, becomes yet another way to complicate life. Another way to add layers of concepts over immediate experience. You stop living and start evaluating if you're living correctly. You stop feeling and start judging if your feelings are adequate. You stop existing and start wondering if you're existing the right way. And in this, you completely lose contact with real life. Because real life doesn't need approval. It doesn't need technique. It doesn't need method. It doesn't need you trying to improve it. It's already happening, perfectly. Without your effort, without your interference. Your body knows how to function. Your lungs know how to breathe. Your heart knows how to beat. Your stomach knows how to digest. All of this is happening without you needing to do anything, without you needing to control, without you needing to manage. And when the ego relaxes, when you stop trying to control everything, when you let go of this need to be in command, you finally realize this. You realize life is taking care of itself. That you don't need to be the manager of everything. That there's a natural intelligence happening through you that doesn't depend on your conscious effort. That doesn't need your techniques. That doesn't need your systems. And in this there's immense relief. A possibility to truly relax. To trust the process. To stop trying to be someone special and simply be what you already are. A living organism. Responding to the environment. Existing without needing justification. Without needing grand purpose. Without needing cosmic meaning. Just living. Moment to moment. Without needing to turn this into a spiritual achievement. Without needing to make this another thing you accomplished. Another identity you cultivated. Another image you maintain. In the end, what Watts was trying to say all along is that trusting yourself isn't trusting a separate character. It isn't trusting a fixed identity. It isn't trusting an ego you built. It's trusting life. It's trusting the process that's happening now, through you, without your permission, without your control. You're not a separate entity trying to control life from outside. You're life manifesting through this specific form. You're an inseparable part of the flow. You're the wave that thinks it's separate from the ocean but never stopped being ocean. And when you understand this, when you feel this viscerally, not just as a concept but as lived reality, everything changes. Because suddenly you're no longer fighting against life. You're moving with it. You're no longer trying to impose a rigid plan on reality. You're responding to what arises. In a fluid way. Organic. Natural. You plant a seed, but you don't try to make it grow by pulling the leaves. You create conditions, but you don't force results. You participate, but you don't dominate. You act, but without rigidity. Without desperate attachment to how things should be. And there's no final destination in this story. There's no arrival point where you finally become enlightened and stop needing anything. Life continues happening. You continue making choices. You continue making mistakes, learning, changing, growing, stumbling. But the quality of experience changes. Because you're no longer living tensely, clinging to a plan, desperately trying to guarantee everything will work out. You're consciously participating in the flow. You're dancing with life instead of fighting against it. You're surfing the wave instead of trying to control the ocean. And this doesn't solve all your problems. It doesn't eliminate all suffering. It doesn't transform you into a perfect being who never feels pain again. You remain human. You remain vulnerable. You remain subject to the same pains and losses as everyone. You'll still suffer. You'll still get hurt. You'll still lose people you love. You'll still have difficult days. But you're no longer adding unnecessary suffering. You're no longer fighting against reality, trying to control the uncontrollable, trying to be someone you're not, trying to force life to follow a script you invented. You're simply here, now, living what's happening, without needing someone telling you you're doing it right, without needing external validation to know you exist, without needing guarantees that everything will work out. You're trusting life, not because you're certain everything will work out, but because you realize there's no other real option. Life is happening anyway, regardless of what you think about it, regardless of what you plan, regardless of what you try to control. You can fight against it, or you can move with it. You can resist, or you can flow. You can contract, or you can relax. And when you stop fighting, when you relax into this flow, when you trust the process instead of trying to dominate it, something interesting happens. You realize you were always okay, that you were always enough, that you never needed to become anything other than what you already are. The search ends not because you found something, but because you realized you were never lost. You were just convinced you were. And now that conviction has dissolved. And what remains is simple. It's life. Happening. Now. And if you made it this far, if something made sense, maybe it's interesting to continue this exploration. Not because you need to follow this channel, but because sometimes it's valuable to have spaces where these ideas can be discussed. If it makes sense, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, leave a like. But do it conscious that you're not following anyone. And if it doesn't make sense, that's fine. You don't need to agree. You don't need to do anything. You just need to live your life in the way that makes sense to you.